Welcome to Christian Writing and Speaking CWS. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson, and today's guest is an author, speaker, and nonprofit consultant. In 2012, he founded a faith based free health clinic that served as a vehicle to share Christ's love through primary health care in an urban, poverty stricken setting. After growing the organization significantly in 4 years, he experienced a leadership fall due to the pressures of his work and his own human weakness. But he was inspired by his experience and decided to use his mistakes and his position as a restored fallen leader for the glory of God and help others while they work hard to impact the world around them. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Mr. Brian Kreeger. Welcome,
Hey,
Brian.
hey, thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that introduction. And every time I hear that, I'm like, are they really talking about me? But anyway, I want to just tell your listeners one thing, and I've been on numerous podcasts, but yours is the first one that we prayed and asked the blessing of God upon it. And there's something special about that. So, that's kind of a behind the scenes thing for your listeners. And I think that is something they need to know because I know it really touched me. So thank you
Thank
for that.
thank you. So you wrote the book, Courageous Ask, but there's a story behind this book, and it has to do with your own personal leadership fail. And I think it's important for people to hear that today, that story, because somebody right now may be on the verge of that, and they may just need this word to help them make a better decision. Do you mind sharing your story today?
Yeah, certainly. I've been looking forward to this because there's nothing better than a podcast that really dives deep into the whys of things, and people need to know that. I think people get encouraged by it. But first thing I want to say is there's no way I can do that in the time of that we have. So I'm going to do the best I can, and if somebody wants to reach out to me, they can do that, or of course get the book. But anyway, just I tell you, I spent most of my adult life career running grocery stores and 27 years managing grocery stores. And I at one point I just felt like God was tugging me somewhere. And in running grocery stores, I can get out in the community a lot and do a lot of things because they really encourage that. And so I was doing a ton of that, and I was volunteering, and I was just doing a lot of things. But I felt like God wanted me to focus my efforts. I mean, I was at the point in our church. I was biblically counseling people. I was teaching classes. I was in charge of adult Sunday school. I was doing just multiple mission trips a year. And I just felt like, I had this thin layer of effort going on, but God wanted me to focus that effort. And so I went to a couple of conferences. I read a couple of books, and God really, really was impressing this upon me. And it really came down to, I met with my pastor, and we had a nice long meeting, and I told him about all this and all the stuff that I was doing in our city and how I felt like these were driving me to a certain point. And he gave me this book, Game Plan by Bob Buford. And that helped me to identify what was I created to do. And I mean, honestly, that's not even the intention of the book, but one part of it helped to drive me there. And so I ended up, boy, there's just so much to share. But God used me to found a free clinic. We had a silent co-founder. I'm a co-founder actually, but I was kind of the driver, and God really tremendously used me, and I was so dependent on him because what did I know about running a free clinic or founding anything? I knew nothing. I knew grocery stores pretty good, but I knew nothing about this. So I knew it was going to have to be a God thing. And um, and I kind of took that to the extreme because we wouldn't take any government money still to this day. I haven't been there in about 4 years, but they don't take any government money. And I took one grant one time for like 5 grand, but that was just tiny. And that was it. So it was a God thing completely. So the whole time I was raising money, and people would tell me that they're inspired by what I did. And of course, the whole time I'm giving credit to God, because God is just, again, what do I know about this? Very little. So I was learning and just living off that dependence. And so we got about 4 years in, and I mean, tremendous things were happening. I mean, I was all over the newspaper, the Chamber of Commerce, and we were collaborating with other organizations. And, I was riding high. I mean, our Sunday paper put out this thing um, every year on the front page of the paper about people that matter. So I was on that 2 years in a row, and all of a sudden it was starting to become super pressure packed, and my head was getting a little big, and I was trying to raise money and without using government money. So there were tons of things happening, but I, all of a sudden my focus wasn't necessarily on my dependence on God. And God, instead of becoming this, oh God, I need this, I need this, I need this, thank you for delivering this, thank you for delivering that, I kind of stuffed God in a corner and just said, okay, God, I got this. I'll call you when I need you. Now I was doing all the things that I was, I was still going to church. I was still going to my men's group. I was still very involved and engaged in church. But all of a sudden I kind of was taking control of this instead of recognizing that God's ultimately in control and supporting the whole thing. So, and I lost the focus somewhat spiritually, as I just described, but I also started to lose it with my family a little bit. Um, all of a sudden, those things that built me up and got me in a position that I could be called a leader, um, spiritual disciplines and family especially, they became the blur in the, I call it the blur in the peripheral vision of the goal uh, of the ministry. So those things are what got me there, but all of a sudden now they were just out on the peripheral, and that's a problem. So that's something I get into actually in the book. But anyway, I started, my identity started to change. My identity became the ministry. So if somebody would ask me how I'm doing, I would answer with how the ministry is doing, because it was such a deep part of who I was. And not only that, I think sometimes when they were asking me, they really wanted to know how the ministry was doing. They didn't really want to know how I was doing, because it was such a big part of my life. Um, so all these form kind of indicators of somebody that's getting ready to fall. And I list a couple of other ones, but um, all of a sudden I wasn't listening to people. In the beginning, again, I didn't know how to open a free clinic. So I was going to conferences, I was calling other free clinics, I was learning. God was showing me tremendous things and his faithfulness to us. But all of a sudden I had all the answers. So I started what I call a speed bumping people. And what that is, somebody comes to you and they honestly, truthfully, with love, want to kind of confront you about things. But what do we do? A lot of times we speed bump them. We just roll kind of right over it. And the fact, and again, I go into this a lot deeper in the book, but what happens when you go over a speed bump too hard, too fast, too many times? Eventually damage is caused. So all of a sudden I was in a position where um, nobody understood, at least from my perspective. And one of the things I'll throw out there for just for leaders in general, one of our deepest desires as people is to be known to our deepest levels, the good, the bad, the ugly, and to be able to be open about that, about those things, but also be loved and accepted. And leaders really struggle with that. It is very hard, because you're afraid that if you allow some of this humanness to be seen, that somehow it's going to affect the ministry. And if the ministry is that such a deep part of who you actually are, it affects you. So anyway, kind of a side deal there, but on with the story. So I felt very isolated. I felt very lonely, which are common words used amongst leaders. I found in all the interviews I did for the book, isolation and loneliness. And not only that, you can just search it on the internet and find that that's a major thing. So um, all of a sudden I found myself in a position where this loneliness and isolation took me over. And most of it was my own fault, by the way. I don't really put it on anyone else. So what happened was I uh, I I had an emotional affair with somebody that I had known for a long time. Uh, People say, "Hey, can you define that?" It never turned physical, but it was a lot of texting, a lot of emails, turned into meetups here and there, but it never turned into a physical type relationship. But it was deeply, deeply inappropriate and sinful. So I just want to be very clear with that. So that's what happened, and that occurred over a period of like 3 months. But it, of course, it stretched because there was a major delusion in my own mind for probably a year or two. But eventually, I started to think about, and God really, and I never stopped going to church. I was always engaged. But God started to say, Brian, you need to use this junk. When I started to get my head back on straight and I started to allow God, one of the things that is awesome, and I thank him for this every single day, and I mean that literally. He continued to tap on my heart the whole time. The whole time he was there, tapping on my heart, trying to get in, and I wouldn't allow him in. I mean, I did it on the outside. I would still go to church and stuff, and I used to so arrogantly, in that delusion, say, "Okay, God, I'm giving you an opportunity. Make something magical happen today at church." And it was just so arrogant. And while that should be the desire of all of our hearts, my heart wasn't in the right place when I was saying that. So anyway, one day I'm at church. I'm down in DC. I live in central Pennsylvania, but I moved to DC because I couldn't get any traction after this happened. Of course, my board fired me, and I mean, I guess it can go back and forth. Did I leave? Did it? Whatever. It's a gray area there. But actually, I want to step back. So I'm telling my board what's going on. I had a special meeting of our board, and I tell them all this, and of course their jaws drop, and they this is not the person I was portraying myself to be. One of the board members, in his mid-60s, used to be a missionary, very wise man, looks at me and says, "Brian, what role did our organization play in what you just described here today?" I had no idea. I didn't even know how to answer the question. I never even thought about it because I just took the responsibility for it. I knew I did it. And again, still in a mind of delusion, but still I knew that it was on me. So I couldn't really answer the guy's question. So that stuck with me over the next couple of years. And as I was working my way out of this, and as God was working in my heart, that question stayed with me. And I realized that there are inherent things in leadership that can form stumbling blocks for the leader. And they got to be very careful, and they've got to be proactive about it. They can't sit back and wait for it to happen. So anyway, you're figuring out that this forms the basis of some of the book. So one day I'm at church. My wife and I are at church in DC, and just honestly, I don't remember the service. I don't remember anything about it, but God told me the whole time I'm just going and I'm developing all these different things. And I know God's leading me down these paths. And how are you going to use this junk? Too many times people go through these kind of things and they don't use them to help other people that are having the same struggles. It's like Dr. Brian Chappelle says, if I get this right, take notice that God mars every single character in the Bible except for one. I mean, God did that for a reason. I mean, we have struggles. We're all part of the fall. We should be helping each other along that pathway in one way or another. and I knew God wanted to use it, and I knew it started with writing this book. So that's a long story. It could have been much longer, but tons and tons of more details. But that's how I got to writing um, the book, The Courageous Ask.
Yeah, I think what you said is what many people are, in fact, feeling. And like you said, people are afraid, leaders are afraid to expose what's going on because there are people who are ready to take them down. I mean, that's a reality of the situation. So you don't feel comfortable just talking to people in general. And my advice is always to talk to other leaders if you're feeling uncomfortable about something that's going on in your life, because they would more likely understand. But I want to know from the book, what do you feel like is the most powerful statement that if there was one thing that a person, a leader, was to take from the book, what would that be?
Be courageous. Don't lose your voice. I honestly, I don't know how to say it in one sentence, but there's probably 4 bullet points. There's keep your identity in Christ and with your family. Um, Stay focused. Okay. Remember who you are. Do not lose your voice. And these are all things that we temporarily say we're going to do that. Like, okay, let's just say we're raising money. So each time that you're meeting with a potential donor, you are giving up a piece of yourself. Most leaders are, because they want to appeal to that person, and that takes away each time you do that, it takes away a little piece of your identity. So I'm not, it just hit me, you asked for one sentence, but I'm going down this rabbit trail. Remember who you are and what got you there, and stay focused on those things, and that will solve all of the other issues, especially and I'm really talking to Christian nonprofit leaders here, and that could be pastors, by the way. They are a Christian nonprofit leader. So that's really, you say about talking to other pastors or other nonprofit leaders, and that is true. I've seen some of it really work out well, that people do have other people to lean on. But too many times, and I have it in the book because I interviewed dozens of people for this book, and I found that a lot of them said, yeah, we go to these gatherings that are conferences, or they're even if we meet once a week or twice a month or whatever. But many times we're just talking about the great things going on in our ministries. We don't get down to that point. And really what I'm trying to do with the book is start this conversation. Start this conversation with the leaders, and start the conversations with the boards of directors. It just hit me what your question was, and now I'm really down a rabbit trail. So
No, but I
I'll bring
love
it
it.
back.
I
I
think,
have so much I want to say about this topic.
yeah, and I think people have to realize, first of all, this can happen to anybody.
Oh
Like
yeah.
we are human. These things can happen if our focus just shifts a little bit. It can happen to us. It can happen to me. And so what you're saying, it is so important that people are listening. I feel like this is a take heed episode. I don't know who needs to hear this, but somebody needs to hear this today. And
Absolutely.
let me say this. No, you may not be able to talk to every leader, but there is somebody in your life
Mhm.
where you can sit down and have an honest conversation with. And if you find that you can't have an honest conversation with somebody, I would strongly suggest that you pray and ask God to send that person into your life. Because you're right, you go to conferences and then everybody is talking about what's great, what's happening in life. Yes, I'm doing this next, but they never really get down to what we call the nitty gritty of life. And after you come together for the banquet or whatever, they go to their room and they may even be contemplating suicide or something.
Yeah.
And people may say that sounds crazy, but that's the
It's not.
reality of life. When you are feeling so much pressure in your life and you're trying to figure out a way out of whatever it is that you feel like you're in.
Mhm.
So your topic is extremely important. I definitely want to um, give people more of an opportunity to talk to you about this and for us to talk about it a little bit more on the show. So we'll try to definitely create that opportunity. But you've given us a lot to think about. Absolutely. And so my question is what is next? What is next for you? What is next for the book itself?
Well, I'm trying, as I said, I'm really trying to get this conversation going because it's not a conversation that people are having in a proactive fashion. I mean, sure, well, think about it this way. How many times does a leader fall? I mean, it would be the rare listener that hasn't experienced this, that a leader falls, local, national, whatever, and they look back on it a little later and they go, you know what? I saw it coming. I saw this indicator, I saw that indicator, but they didn't have the courage to talk about it to that leader or to the board or to whoever. But most times people say, I saw it coming. And they did with me, and they did with all the people that I interviewed. It was obvious that it was coming, but we don't do anything about it. That's why the subtitle is a proactive approach to prevent the fall of Christian nonprofit leaders. My deal now is let's get out in front of it, and I'm trying to get that conversation going. Like if you looked right now on the internet, you Googled um, board of directors responsibilities. How much it is rare that you will find. In fact, I can't even think of one that has as part of those responsibilities the care of the personal life of the leader, or even looking into the personal life of the leader. And too many people say, no, 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 whoa, that's off limits. But it's not, because that's where the falls come, and the falls end up in the lap of the board of directors. So I'm trying to get that conversation going. So I attend conferences. I have a couple of speaking engagements coming up and different things like that. But you would be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, at how hard it is to get that conversation going. It's too uncomfortable, and people don't think it's not going to happen to them. But that's what's commonly said after a fall, that, oh, wow, we never thought this would happen. Well, I'm all about let's get out in front of it and let's see what we can do to prevent it, instead of looking back and saying, man, we saw it coming. So I'm getting that. I write a weekly blog on my website. It comes out to subscribers on Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays today, it'll hit social media. So I'm trying to get that conversation going because it's just not going on. And just trying to convince people that, yes, you need to a certain level, look at the personal life of a Christian nonprofit leader, especially when I use that word Christian nonprofit, the word Christian. It really, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing anyway? I mean, it doesn't, not a leader. You don't have to be a leader. We are supposed to be in each other's lives. We are supposed to be encouraging and loving one another. And, like anything else, there are certain levels and certain depths that you can go to. But for a board to say, it's just not my responsibility, and that's off limit, and all the people around them, it could be family, could be constituents, could be congregations. You could be that one friend that leader needs. So what I'm saying is all these people have roles in helping their leaders to stay upright.
Yeah, I most definitely agree with that. Brian, tell people how they can connect with you.
Okay, well, I have a very simple email address. I don't mind emails. Brian, Brian, at briankreeger.com, KREEGER.com. I have a website, briankreeger.com. You know what? I'm going to just say this. I hate saying all this because it sounds so self-promotional because those are the names.
It's
But,
not, but we need to know how to
yeah,
connect with you and how to get your book, because it's important. The message is
yeah,
important.
yeah, of course. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble. And I will tell you, there are some national organizations with big memberships that are really starting to dive into this. And you're going to see some changes probably next year in some major organizations that probably many of your listeners are part of, because this is such a huge issue. But nobody's talking about it. Not enough people are talking about it. They're just starting. So anyway.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story and about your book. And just the way that you're helping people. I appreciate it. If nobody else is telling you that, I appreciate it because I understand how important it is. CWS audience, I don't know who needs to hear this today, but this message is so important. If God has connected you to this episode, it is definitely for you. And if you know somebody else who is struggling right now, maybe you see that the fall is coming for them, get his book and give it to them. Okay. Let's stop these things from happening by opening up the conversation. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And until next time, beautiful people, God bless.